buckle up. But you were kind enough to give me a bio as well. And Mr. William Meader is an influential and respected teacher of the esoteric philosophy. William has established an international reputation as a gifted communicator of this philosophy. He provides a diverse array of workshops, lectures, webinars, all devoted to nurturing a deep understanding of the spiritual path, both as it pertains to an individual and to humanity as a whole. He is the author of Supernal Light, and you can find this out in the garden room afterward, as well as many articles and video presentations focusing on communicating his understanding of a wide variety of spiritual subjects. William teaches in the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand, but he gets to reside in Oregon. Welcome to Paradise at Lake Harriet Spiritual Community in Linden Hills, Mr. William Meader.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's really good to be back. It's been about 4 years. I always find coming back to Minneapolis a very special thing because actually this is where I was born and raised. I grew up about just off of Girard and 24th. It seems like another lifetime ago, but there's something about coming back to the nest that feels good. So my subject today is the eye of vision. And what I'd like to do is give you a sense of how the esoteric philosophy understands this mysterious thing called the third eye, and how to understand its relevance in our lives. You know, it's so interesting because people talk about the third eye, but what is it? What is it? And how do we recognize when the third eye is functioning in the fabric of our awareness? And there's a whole understanding that the third eye, which is sometimes called the eye of vision in some of the occult literature, that the third eye is actually something that has a relationship to where you are on the path. You see, it's so interesting. A lot of times when we hear the term third eye and we're spiritually oriented, we tend to think that the third eye is open. Well, in fact, it's actually, if you're seriously on the path, it's not fully open until just at the front door of full enlightenment. It's actually partially open. For most of us here, it's a squinting third eye. But I always think, hey, that's better than none at all, you know. And actually, in the esoteric philosophy, it's understood that there are 3 parts of our sense of identity. There's the lower self, personality. Some people might call that ego. There's the higher self, which we would call the soul, which is the sum total of the wisdom and the love that you hold deep within you, and you have garnered that wisdom over the course of countless incarnations. And then there's another level that is beyond the soul that I'm not going to dive into fully today, but to say there's another structure of identity that's even more fundamental in the soul, and that's called the monad. The monad. Now, the monad is, I suppose in Christian language, the monad would be equivalent to spirit, I suppose, with a capital S. In Hinduism, it's equivalent to the Atman. But all 3 of those identities, those places deep within that we realize ourselves over the vastness of incarnational history, all 3 of those places are places where consciousness looks out. And in a way, they all have a relationship to vision. Now, the personality, the lower self, its relationship to vision is literally the physical eyes. And that the physical eyes are, sometimes in the literature, they're called the eyes that look from here to there. Meaning the physical eyes understand reality through relationship between the self and the perceived not self. The perceived not self. And for a long time, for most of our incarnational history, that's the only kind of vision that we experience. But when you start to awaken, and there's a whole discussion we could have about What's that about, the awakening? But there's a time in everyone's incarnational history that for the first time, the soul, the higher consciousness, or what we call the content of the causal body, is first registered within the personality for the first time. It's a big awakening. And it's an awakening that feels like a flashing forth of something divine deep within. It's often fleeting at first, but nonetheless, from that point forward, life is never the same. Life is never the same. And it's at that awakening where, for the first time, the third eye on the level of the soul, which is often called the eye of vision, that's when that third eye begins to open slightly. And it kind of opens and closes a lot. And there's a whole period called the probationary path, where for some time there's sort of that sense of, I'm sensing a deeper spiritual quality, now I'm not. I'm sensing it, but I've lost it. I'm sensing it, but I've lost it. And there's a whole understanding of why that is, but the fundamental truth is that a deeper perceptual mechanism is being discovered deep within. You see, the soul utilizes, that it wants to utilize that personality. The goal, the purpose of your spiritual life in the most fundamental sense is the soul wants to bring its wisdom, acquired wisdom, its Christ-like love through the personality. It wants to find a way of expressing itself through that personality without the personality getting in the way. By the way, that's the challenge. And in so doing, it wants to make an uplifting contribution to something beyond oneself, and that's service. In fact, there are several laws of the soul, and one of those laws is called the law of service. And yet that soul, in order to do that, one of its primary tools to try to work through that personality is this eye of vision, this new perceptual instrument deep inside. And so in many ways, the path and where you stand on the path is related directly to how much of that eye is open and how steady is its gaze. Everybody with me? You tracking this okay? Okay. So one of the things to keep in mind is that the third eye serves many functions. And I want to list 3 or 4 of them for you so that you get a deeper sense of it. Because on one level, on the most basic level, the third eye has both a horizontal function and a vertical function. The vertical function is what we often think about it. It's that it makes it possible for the soul to be recognized by the personality. So we're saying that's vertical, even though the soul is not really up. The soul is deep inside, but from a kind of educational perspective, we often talk about it as sort of being up. But that is all about creating the alignment between your higher nature and your lower nature, and the third eye is used for that purpose. That soul needs that. So that when we talk about the third eye as an instrument of registering divine intuition, registering within the brain the deeper wisdom that soul contained within your causal body, to register that, it requires that the third eye have some measure of opening to it. Now, that's the vertical component to it. The horizontal component to it is that the third eye is an incredibly important instrument used as a function of service to the outer world. In that context, here's an understanding. The third eye, one of its functions when it comes to service, is it helps each of us to see the soul within the other. The third eye makes it possible to see the soul hidden within all things. And I don't necessarily mean the soul not only the soul within another human being. When you know how that is when you have a deep recognition of somebody in a deep, profound way. It's usually your third eye that's helping you perceive that. But this philosophy will say that, look, the whole world is a manifestation of divinity struggling to express itself through form, just like you and I are soulful divine creatures trying to express through form called personality. So what I'm saying is this philosophy will say that, look, social institutions are living entities. They have a higher and lower nature. They have a soul and a personality. Every institution has a soul and a personality. For instance, the business world, there's the soul of business. There's the personality of business, but there's the soul of business. There's the soul of politics or government. I know that's hard to imagine sometimes these days, but there is a soul to government, and there's a personality to it. Education, science, religion, the arts, all of these are categories of human consciousness evolving over the vastness of time. All are struggling to transform their lower nature so that they become more expressive of their higher nature. And your third eye is an instrument that is slowly trying to help you recognize the soul in those larger systems. And that's important, because let's say that you're on the path, let's say that you have some measure of awakening to your higher consciousness. You're going to feel a need to serve on some level. But where you serve is going to be based upon a variety of things. What department of humanity will you serve? And that has a lot to do with the type of soul you have. Another big subject in this philosophy is the 7 soul types that relate to the 7 rays. But whatever and you will be inclined to use that third eye and serve humanity. You will tend to gravitate your life, navigate your life within those social institutions that have you might say, a harmonic relationship to your own soul nature. And your third eye will therefore be very related to that. In other words, let us say that you are a second ray soul. Now, the second ray is called the ray of love and wisdom. And people that have that type of soul quality are people that tend to navigate themselves often in terms of serving humanity through education, the helping professions, and also many of the healing arts. Now, that means that you, as a second ray soul, your third eye, its capacity to sense the soul in the other and drive you to serve it more effectively, will be particularly related to that stream, as opposed to, let's say, a fifth ray soul. The fifth ray is called the ray of concrete knowledge and science, and many very progressive scientists have fifth ray souls. Their third eye, when it's opened, their third eye will provide them a deeper sensitivity to the deeper soul nature of science, but not so much education, because that's a different stream. So what I'm trying to say is your third eye is uniquely designed to be able to see the soul in the other, but it's going to be more categorical. In other words, it's going to be related to a particular social institution or category of human service and not broadly. Still with me? You get that? Okay. So, and by the way, it goes further than that. For instance, there's the soul of a nation. In this philosophy, we study the soul of America. What's its nature? What's its ray type? There's also the soul of humanity. So this is a huge subject of the understanding of the multidimensional quality of soul itself. So my first point was to say, look, the soul, the third eye functions as an instrument that tries to sense the soul in the other. Let me tell you what else the third eye does for you. The third eye is a directing agency, pretty much for the reason I said. In other words, when you feel that you're on the path and you feel that you want to make a creative contribution to the outer world, you feel a calling to do that in some way, your third eye is actually helping you to navigate where to go next. What is the next direction. And actually it talks about, it helps you sense the correct stream. And in my scenario, for the scientist, it's going to be along that line. For the educator or the healer, it's going to be along another line, you see? So it helps you recognize your stream and how to focus in that direction. So it's very related to creativity in that sense. You know, you're all familiar with that famous phrase, energy follows thought. Okay, that's a really well-known concept. But do you know that phrase has been truncated, and that's only the first half of the sentence? Somehow, the second half got lost in the mist of time. Here's the whole sentence. Energy follows thought, and the I directs the energy. The I directs the energy. Wow, what a thing to drop from the discussion. But that's really important to realize. A third function of the third eye is that it actually, how to put this? There's a branch of this philosophy that's all about creativity. It's called the art of magic. Not hocus pocus, but the amazing process of taking an insightful idea that comes to you from the soul, shapes thoughts around it, how to build those thoughts that are rightly representing the soul's intuitional impulse, and how to bring it through your personality, how to bring it through your emotional body, how to bring feeling to that new thought that is arising in you, and how to carry that feeling into the outer world. There's a huge, huge, fascinating branch of inquiry along that line. But one of the things when you study this subject of creative magic is that you realize that the lower self, because we're not fully enlightened, we're only partially on our way, the lower self at times has undue sway. Have you noticed? Okay, good, then I'm not alone. Okay. And that have you ever done this where you're trying to focus on something and it's really important, but it's something somehow, well, even now, like it probably hasn't happened yet, but if I were to with you for a couple of hours, I think it's a fair shot that there will be moments when you'll check out and you'll think about something else. And then you'll think about something else, and then you'll realize, oh, I'm not focusing. Well, what happens is this. There's this idea in this philosophy that the lower self often wants to take control of your inner process. And it can distract you to deflect your stream of thought, your focus, into something else. Well, the third eye, particularly when it's nearly fully open, and by the way, when it's fully open, that has a lot to do with the monad, and that's called the eye of Shiva. Have you heard the term, the eye of Shiva? So the two eyes, personality, the eyes that looked out from here to there. The soul's eye, the eye of vision. The monad's eye, Shiva, the eye of Shiva. Okay? And when that eye of Shiva is beginning to really play out, it is said that the third eye is so strong that it can sever the ability of the personality to deflect your focus and keep you completely aligned with what you intend to do to serve and uplift humanity in your own way. It's also a fourth point that's really important, is that the eye of Shiva, the third eye, in the creative process, there's a phase in the creative process where the third eye is beginning to assess the chakra system. And that you see your chakras, your 7 major chakras, are energy outlets. Each chakra, of course, is of a different type of energy. And your third eye in the creative process is also beginning to attend to the chakras and utilizing those chakras as preparation for your delivery. So let us say, for example, I'll just give you an example. Let us say that you're in your process of creativity. You're thinking about bringing something into the world. Maybe you're going to deliver it to a group of people, or maybe you're going to it's more of a more physical, tangible thing. Whatever it is, the third eye is going to assess which chakras in your system need to be galvanized and heightened in their vibration in order to allow those qualities to become part of the final expression. So let us say that you realize you realize that your third eye is realizing that more love needs to bathe the delivery of whatever it is you're bringing into the world. It will literally activate your heart chakra in a more vibrant way, bathe and allowing you, as you deliver whatever it is you're bringing forward, it will condition that idea with more Christ-like love. So it actually is functioning in your chakra system as well. You see, so it's a huge subject, but you can see that the third eye is much more than just kind of spiritual awareness. There's kind of a science to it, in a way. Now, one thing I want you to understand about the third eye is that it's connected to a variety of other things. Like, for instance, when the third eye first begins to open, it's an indication that you've had the awakening and that this chakra, the ajna center, this chakra, the crown center, there's an energetic, unobstructed interplay now established between these two chakras. When that's established, that's when the third eye begins to open. Then later, as you evolve your consciousness over time, as you have more of that personality yielding to the soul's regime, then that third eye is actually going to there's a chakra back here called the Alta Major center, and it begins to become much more active. That Alta Major center then energetically connects with this chakra, and it creates a triangle, and there's a circulatory flow of energy between those three chakras. That circulatory flow then causes the third eye not just to open more widely, but to actually position itself more toward the center of the head. You know, we sometimes think that this is the third eye, the ajna center. No, it's not. That's not the third eye. It's the symbol we use visually to represent the third eye, but that's not the third eye. The third eye is the product, ultimately, of three chakras interreacting with each other, these three chakras, crown, ajna, Alta Major. And the third eye begins to position itself much more into the center of the head. Now, when I say center of the head, please do not think gray matter. We're not talking about that. Although we can isolate where it is in the center of the head, it occurs, this third eye begins to center itself very close to what physically is called the pineal gland. Now, but it's actually an etheric substance, not dense physical. Now, in this philosophy, the word etheric is representing the chakras themselves. That's an energy. Technically, it's substantial. There's a type of subtle substance associated with the chakras, and that etheric body is not just when you see drawings of the chakras. Sometimes we think, it's all right here. No, it's not all right. It's throughout your whole body. In fact, it flows often from the back to the front. Actually, the back is actually where the power is. This is just an effect. The real power is in the back. But what I guess I'm trying to say is that in the center of the head, that's also part of the etheric body. So this you might say, relocated third eye is going to position itself in the area around the proximity of what we would call the pineal gland, but again, in the etheric substance. And that place deep within your head, etherically, is an amazing place because a lot of important internal structural variables are part of it. For instance, I don't know if you have heard of the term antakarana, the antakarana. Now, antakarana is a Sanskrit word, and it's considered the communication bridge deep inside that links the soul with the mind, with the brain. And you might say it's the conduit through which the intuitions of the soul reach the third eye. It's one thing to have a soul in this remote, deep place, and another thing to have a third eye. But what is the connection? And that's called the antakarana. But you see, friends, the antakarana doesn't exist naturally. It has to be built. And it's built, it anchors itself in that same region, in the region of the pineal gland, in the same area that we're talking about the emerging third eye. But it's built with three things integrated into the fabric of your life. And it takes several incarnations to get it fully built. The first thing is that heartfelt service, a commitment to lovingly commit your life to serve the betterment of something beyond yourself. That in itself is building the threads of connection that become the antakarana. That one important point. The second is that the antakarana its building is facilitated by studying particularly abstract things because you want to develop your higher mind, because the causal body, the container that's holding the soul's consciousness, is actually on the higher mental plane. And so we want to exercise and develop our higher mental faculties, because our educational system, particularly primary education, does a wonderful job of the lower mind, but we're often weak and need to develop our higher manasic, which is Sanskrit for mind. It needs to be further developed. The more the more your mind is comfortable with abstract mental processes, let's just say this, the more you're in the neighborhood of the soul. Okay? And the third is meditation. Meditation. Sometimes those three things are called the three pillars. The three pillars. Service, study, meditation. And I'm only bringing this up is because that antakarana that's slowly being built anchors itself in the same place in the center of the head where the third eye is finding its residence, you see. And so you see there's a correlation between that and where you are on the path. The more the third eye is open, the more antakarana has been built. Every time you meditate, for instance, you go deep inside yourself with a structured meditation. You go deep inside yourself, and you're actually in that process. You go to that subtle place, and then you come back, and you're actually leaving threads of vitality that become part of that antakarana over time. So, in the esoteric philosophy, the science of the antakarana is a huge, huge subject, fantastically important, and I encourage any of you to look more deeply into it, because it really is, it's a measure of how much is built is a measure of where you are on the path as well. You see? So that's another process. There's something in this philosophy called the lighted lamp. Now, the lighted lamp is also connected to this same part within the head. Same thing within the head. It is said that when the third eye positions itself into the center of the head, when the antakarana has at least some tenuous full extension between the soul and the personality, that in the center of your head, in etheric substance, a spark of light emerges. It's not a light as we would talk about light, but it's called light in the sense that it's something divinely radiatory. And as you evolve your consciousness, and as more of that third eye opens, and as more of that antakarana is built, that light begins, it first flickers. It's just fading in and out. But over time, it becomes more steady. And when it becomes steady, there's another facet of this philosophy called the science of initiation. But when it becomes steady, it means that you are ready to take what we call the first initiation. But it gets brighter and brighter. And indeed, when you're at the gate of enlightenment, it's so bright. Well, it's the basis of, in Christian iconography, of the halo. That's what a halo is. A halo is the light with the lighted lamp within the head, now so radiant that it's been depicted as like this radiant sun around you. It's not just a theory. Occultly speaking, it is a real thing. So all of this is tied in with the process of seeing. I'm trying to help you see the connections between the building of the antakarana, the gradual opening of the third eye and the repositioning of the third eye, the awakening of the lighted lamp, and it's all happening in the same place, in the center of the head, etherically. So here's the thing. If you're a spiritual oriented, and you start to share some spiritual ideas with people, and if some people say to you, that's all in your head, exactly. They're so right. It is all in the head, you see. It's also been called the heart within the head. The heart within the head. Because this center in you is filled with not just divine intelligence, but even a higher quality of love. In other words, this is a great heart center, but its higher octave is actually in the center of the head, and that's called the heart within the head. And that's a place where it's not just Christ-like love, which is what this is about, it's Christ-like love coupled with divine intelligence fused as one. It becomes intelligent love, which is far superior than just love alone, you see. So in the creative process, friends, when you are trying to bring something forward, really, it is said that the whole game is right in the center of the head, really. Yeah. And the more that antakarana is built, the more the third eye is open, the more you're sensing your relationship to the greater life. One of the principles that I always think is important for people somewhat new to this philosophy to get a hold of is called the principle of hylozoism. That might be a new word for you, I don't know. But hylozoism is a really, really important concept that represents a container for understanding the whole spiritual journey. And it has actually two definitions that are important. And I'll be able to, after sharing this, I'll try to tie it back into understanding the third eye. But number one, this philosophy basically says that in the ultimate sense, there's only one thing. One living being, one life force in all of creation. Some people call that God. Other people call it Brahma. Other people call it universal intelligence. Whatever you want to call it's fine. But that one, we call it often the one life, is kind of a simple way of saying it, the one life. And that for reasons that we can't even come close to fathoming, that one life appears to be incarnating itself as creation. It's the one becoming the many. So unlike the Western theologies of the Abrahamic religious views that hold this strong notion that there's God out there and creation and a kind of gulf between the two. Esotericism says, no, that's not how to frame it. It's not God and creation, it's God as creation. And God as creation is an entirely different template of understanding your relationship to the greater whole. You and I are not separate from divinity. At the highest place in you, you are divinity. The monad in you is the spark of life that is the divinity in you. The soul in you is the Christ in you, eye of vision. The monad in you is the God in you, eye of Shiva. So that's the first definition of hylozoism. So let's put it another way. With that definition, that means that the more your soul's eye, the eye of vision, is open, the more you're coming on to rapport with the Christ principle. And by the way, when I use the word Christ, I don't mean it in a Christian sense. That's far, far too limited. I mean it is the principle of love and wisdom and inclusivity. So that's the first definition. The second definition of hylozoism is incredibly important in this philosophy, and that is this: that every unit of life in all of creation, every unit of life is a cell nested within a greater entity, a greater life. Every unit of life is a unit within a larger living system. So I often use the example to highlight it. If I take a cell that's in my hand, from an esoteric perspective, that cell is a living entity. It's a being. It has consciousness, infinitesimal, no question, but it's nonetheless a cell and of life. And yet, it's only a cell within a larger system that's me. And you and I are cells within a larger entity as well. And that entity has a name, and it's called humanity. And in this philosophy, humanity is viewed as one being, one entity. And it has a soul, and it has a personality, and it's struggling to transform the lower on behalf of the higher, just like you and me. And indeed, much of the world crisis today, I hope you've noticed, but much of the world crisis today is rooted in the most fundamental sense between a battle of the soul of humanity trying to impress itself onto the personality of humanity, and the personality of humanity, its lower shadowy issues, are rising up in opposition and defiance. That's I'm actually going to be doing a talk tomorrow night all about that in another location here, but just understand that the soul of humanity is a soul, and yet humanity is an entity within a larger entity as well. And what's that entity called? The planetary logos. That's the entity that ensouls the whole planet. And kingdoms of nature are merely layers of its consciousness evolving through form. Mineral kingdom, plant kingdom, animal kingdom, human kingdom, and three kingdoms beyond the human, those are just outpictured manifestations of this greater planetary entity evolving itself. And that's a God to us. And yet, our earth is a living being. Maybe we want to call it Gaia, that's good too. Our earth as a living being is a unit within another entity, and that's called the solar logos, the entity that ensouls the whole solar system. And in that context, our earth is a chakra within it. And it is said that our solar logos, which is a sort of a bigger God, you might say, is a chakra within a larger entity. Now we're getting into occult cosmology, and that larger entity is made up of 7 stars, ours being one. Sometimes it's called the local group. And that entity has a mysterious name in some of the ancient literature. It's called the one about whom naught may be said. So what's the point of going on? But I think I will. Let's jump up a few levels. The whole Milky Way galaxy which now we understand has something, I just read recently, it was something like 150 billion stars. Those are 150 billion solar loci, and that whole spiral galaxy that we're part of, that's called a galactic logos. And by the way, we now know that there are millions of galaxies, maybe billions. This new telescope is opening us up in a lot of interesting ways. So I always think, if somebody comes up to you and says, I had a meditation and I reached universal consciousness, all I can say is turn and run. Turn and run. Not even the solar logos could say that. Because a lot of times when you're on the path and you're waking up, a lot of times you'll have an expansive experience inside, and that's because your third eye is starting to open. You're going to have a realization of an expansive. And there's a tendency, when it's new to you, the personality says it believes that you're sensing it all. No, you're not sensing it all. You're just sensing more. So there's confusion at the beginning of the path between moreness and allness. As you go further in your evolution, and the third eye opens more fully, greater understanding, and you see it's a relative statement of expansion. But see, hylozoism is really important because it does correlate to the third eye, in as much as the more you have your third eye open, the more you're more consciously participating in the consciousness of that larger entity that you're a unit within. So for instance, I mentioned earlier that there are 7 types of souls, okay? What I didn't say to you is that your soul is that you're part of an ashram. And when you hear the word ashram, which of course means spiritual home, we often think that the ashram, it's somehow connected to India. Okay, there are ashrams in India, yes. They're lovely places to go and have a deep spiritual meaning, but that's not the ashram. The ashram is not in India. And by the way, it's not in Minneapolis either. Where's the ashram? It's deep inside. And that your soul is a member of one of 7 ashrams according to the type of soul you have. And that ashram has a piece of work to do over the vastness of time in support of humanity's upliftment. And when your third eye starts to open, you catch the attention of the ashram that you're a part of. We're all probationary members of the ashram. If you were a full member, you'd have another name. You'd be called the master. But we're all probationary. But when you have your third eye open, you actually catch the attention of the ashram that is actually the source of your real spiritual inspiration. So we could put it in another way, that Ashramic intimacy has a direct relationship to the third eye and the measure of how much that third eye is opening. In this philosophy, we have 2 tracks to understand your relationship to the inner ashram. One track has to do with initiation. And that has to do with how well you've demonstrated that mastery over your lower nature. So the first initiation has a lot to do with, for instance, mastery over the physical appetites of the body. Second initiation has a huge amount to do with becoming more masterful of your emotional life and learning how to use emotion rather than being used by emotion. Third initiation has much to do with mastery of the mind itself. So the track having to do with initiation is also tracking us to deeper connections with the inner ashram and widening of the third eye and a greater sensitivity to the intuitive promptings that the soul is trying to express, the ashram is trying to express through you. So here's how it works. Ashram, it radiates absolutely impersonal intuition. The soul in you, the causal body, has a natural tendency to be receptive to it because it's on the same ray line. The soul then tries to radiate and build thought forms around those formless intuitions and build those thought forms using the mind of the personality, and it needs the personality to do that. But to get the message across correctly, that's going to be determined by how much of that third eye is open. So that's one track. Another track has to do with not so much initiation, but more about the free flow of connectedness. So there's a whole study called, the beginning is the little chela ship. Chela is another word for disciple. The chela and the light, the accepted disciple, and chela on the thread. There's a whole understanding of that. It's not so much about mastery of the lower self, but instead a measure of intimacy with the inspirations coming from the ashram. All of that, though, friends, all of that is very much related to more and more conscious utilization of your third eye and the degree to which that third eye is open in your service work. And I will close. I've got the signal that it's time to stop, but I just will tell you that if you're awakening, or if you're fully awake to your inner calling, just realize this. You are needed more now than at any other time in human history. Because this philosophy is basically saying, it's long been understood that humanity is approaching a great transitional period, and we're in what is called the era of the burning ground. Humanity evolves through crisis, actually. And crisis is often a prelude to an expansion of consciousness. And this is the phase of the burning ground. As we enter into the Aquarian age, it's very much related to the challenges of making that transition. And right now, more than ever, your gift, your love, your wisdom is needed now. And so the more conscious you are of your inner structure and how it works, that'll make you more effective in that role of service to the greater whole. And if you're interested in that whole subject more, again, I'm going to be doing a whole talk tomorrow night at another location, and we can fill you in on that later if you'd like in the room back here if you like. But I got to stop. I got the signal. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Was I wrong? That was wonderful and interesting.